welcome back, guys, gals, non-binary pals. I've been offline for a little while because I've had voice problems lately. I had COVID for the first time a couple weeks ago, and my voice has just not been right since. So during this video, I'm gonna have to take cough breaks, but I really wanted to get a video out, especially talking about the subject today, which is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And this isn't going to be necessarily a review of the game. This is going to be me talking about the game, my thoughts, and having a conversation. So obviously, if you've played the game and you agree with or disagree with some of the points, let me know below. Let's have a little chat. And I do want to go into this right off the bat, explaining sort of my history with Final Fantasy VII, because my history with the game might be different than your history. So we are our experiences, we are our pasts. So I might have different thoughts than you based on this fact. Sorry up front if there's weird cuts in this video because my throat might get scratchy. I need to cough, need to drink water, stuff like that. Throat's still not 100%, but I'm there. I'm doing it. And don't forget, this video is officially sponsored by W, the Jitterless Energy Blend. One of my favorite energy drink blends out there, and I really mean it. I would not let them sponsor me if I didn't believe in the product. Try Beach and Peach. It's amazing. You get 10% off with my link below, and it helps support the channel. So like I said before, the lens of this video is from a Final Fantasy VII, the original Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 1 purist. And I've told this story before in my PlayStation video, I think, but Final Fantasy VII, when it was released, I was actually in high school at the time, and that's the time that it came out was one of the more formative years in my life. It was, in high school, I didn't have a job yet or anything, and I had a lot of time to play games. So that's sort of why, just in general, the 32-bit era is my favorite era of all time. The Sega Saturn and then the PlayStation after that. Those systems hit me when I was really getting into games at the time. I was never into games too much before then, simply because I grew up pretty poor, so I didn't have a Nintendo until almost the end of the Nintendo lifespan, and then I had a Genesis after that. And that's all I had till the 32-bit era, till the Sega Saturn. Which again, I've told the story in my Sega Saturn video. Watch that if you haven't, please. And to reiterate how I got my PlayStation 2, at the PlayStation also, not PlayStation 2. How I got my PlayStation at the time, I couldn't afford one because I just got a Saturn at launch. And the PlayStation launched relatively after the Saturn, pretty close, within 3 months or so. And I could not afford another system. My family could not afford another one, but one of the kids I sat by in marine biology class in high school, he knows that I like video games, so he poked me one day and he's like, hey, I got this PlayStation brand new, I'll sell it to you for $100. And the PlayStation just came out at the time. It was $299 plus tax at retail, so $100 for a brand new sealed one. That was kind of fishy. And he was honest about it. He worked at Kmart. If you're from the US, you know Kmart from back in the day. Anyways, he was a stalker at Kmart, so obviously fell off the back of the truck, if you get my saying. And now I don't condone that, but at the time, I was young and it was a deal that I couldn't pass up. So went back to my mom, begged my mom, and bam, we got that PlayStation. So we got a PlayStation also. So the first PlayStation game I ever owned was actually Resident Evil in a long box, Resident Evil 1. And I honestly didn't know much about the PlayStation, meaning upcoming releases and stuff. And then, shortly after the PlayStation came out, that's when, the whole Squaresoft Nintendo debacle started to become public, where, Square was making Final Fantasy VII essentially on the N64, but they weren't happy with it being cartridges and all that sort of stuff. So they made the big old change to bring it to the PlayStation. And that single decision changed the gaming landscape for sure. It changed my gaming world because I didn't quite know it at the time, but the PlayStation was when I started to become a super JRPG fan because it had such good games on it. And it started with Final Fantasy VII. I played a few of the Squaresoft games in the past, Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 3/6 on the Super Nintendo, and I love them. They're two of the GOATs, greatest of all time. But I'm telling you, when Final Fantasy VII finally came out, and I tracked the development of Final Fantasy VII from all the demos, I got every demo I could, it had, at least from what I remember, 3 distinct demos. There might be more, I'm not exactly sure, but there's 3 distinct demos at least, and each one had varying changes in them, and I loved putting them in and playing through them and like noticing the changes. I was reading about it, you know, in Game Fan magazine every month, hyping it up. And then when Final Fantasy VII came out, it was life-changing to me. It was one of those wow moments to me, like, oh my God, gaming this is next level. This is not the Super Nintendo anymore. This is, you know, the future. And I loved everything about it when Final Fantasy VII came out, every little thing. I actually skipped school. It came in early at the EB Games, I remember. It was the middle of the week when I got mine, because they came in early, and I believe they sold it to me early. My pre-order gave it to me early. Anyways, but as soon as I got it, I skipped school the next, 2-3 days. And I beat it before all my friends because I skipped school. I had the Final Fantasy VII fever. Zip, don't tell my mom. But it was definitely absolutely one of those pillar games of my life. I'm going to make a video about the rest of the pillar games, sort of, the games that had hugely influenced, what I like in my life. So it's mostly nostalgia, but I definitely love the original PlayStation version. I love everything about it. Even, the graphics. Some people obviously don't like the graphics. They like the graphics of Final Fantasy VIII better because they're all, hyper realistic rather than realistic in the battles and, super deformed in, the world map or whatever. And it's okay to not like Final Fantasy VII too. I'm okay with if you don't like it. It's okay. But I'm talking about me. All I can talk about is me on this channel. Not you. Me. So I loved everything about it. I had a game, with maxed out hours on it. 3, fully maxed out of all materials, including summons, including Knights of the Round. I did it all without a Game Shark. Like over multiple playthroughs, I don't know how much time I would have logged on that game total, but it's got to be up there with almost World of Warcraft for me. And I've played World of Warcraft for, 10 years, 12 years. I loved the game. And the remakes had me worried a little bit because Squaresoft today, in my opinion, is not the same Squaresoft as yesterday. The same Squaresoft as, the Squaresoft of yesterday in the PlayStation days almost single-handedly turned the tides. It made Sony what they are. If the PlayStation 1 did not get Squaresoft, if Squaresoft went to the Sega, the Saturn, or stayed on the N64, we would be in a completely different gaming world right now. I truly believe Sony would not have lasted as long as they have if it weren't for Squaresoft single-handedly. Obviously, it's just conjecture. It's just my opinion. You can disagree. It's cool. But I know back in the day, I got a PlayStation for Resident Evil and the Squaresoft game. That's what I got it for. So fast forward to current times with the Final Fantasy VII Remake being announced. And when it was first announced, I actually wasn't that excited about it. And that's because I don't necessarily trust Squaresoft nowadays. Squaresoft nowadays is definitely a different company. It's very profit-driven. It's not creative-driven anymore. They have a little more shaky of a modern record to me on overpromising and under-delivering for their games. It is 100% not the Squaresoft of old, in my opinion. So I was worried, and I actually really was against the decision to split up Final Fantasy VII into multiple parts. And I think my fears were warranted for sure after, the second part's out now, obviously. Rebirth is the second part. First part was Remake, second part Rebirth, which is what we're talking about today, but I have to get through my history first, my Final Fantasy VII history. I was really against them splitting up the game because I knew what it would mean is they'd put in a bunch of filler stuff. And obviously, instead of just one full price game, they're making 3 full price games. They're not any cheaper because they're shorter parts. And I will never agree with anti-consumer decisions like that, made out of greed. I will never, ever stand for that, no matter what company. And their justification for it, I guess it makes sense. They said, if they did put it all together, it would take too long to do. And so to splitting it up, they could essentially fund the next part with the part before it, if that makes sense. Not that a company as big as Squaresoft needs help funding stuff, which I will say out loud. But I did play the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I did give it a chance, obviously. And I didn't think it was that great, to be quite honest. There's definitely a lot of things I didn't enjoy about the game. The biggest thing, let's start with the positives though. The biggest thing I did enjoy about the remake was, the Final Fantasy VII universe. The fact that newer players that maybe didn't play the original finally get to meet, Cloud and Tifa and Aerith and Barret. I don't believe in gatekeeping whatsoever. So please, more people come join the Final Fantasy VII world. And that's amazing to me. That's amazing to me that this universe, this world has lasted so long and meant so much to some people that we can honestly share it now with other people. Even playing through some of the things that I didn't like about the remake, it felt like a warm nostalgia, like blanket over me as I played it. It did bring me back to a simpler time in my life. So it did succeed in that. It succeeded in bringing me back and giving me a familiar feeling, a familiar, very comfortable feeling, comfortable world, comfortable characters. And I do really commend them for that. The things I didn't like that much is obviously I didn't like splitting up the game. And I still, even after playing Rebirth, I still maybe don't like them splitting up the game. I think they could have split it up more evenly. But we'll get to that when we actually get to Rebirth. Like, my biggest problem with Remake, honestly, was the dialogue. The dialogue and the writing, so bad. So bad. Some of the new characters, I abhor. Like Roche, the motorcycle dude. He's got to be my least favorite character in any video game of all time. Please get him out of here. And yes, he does show up in Rebirth. Spoiler warning. I was not happy about, but I understand, some changes were made, and I don't like Roche. Get Roche out of here. And the biggest thing I didn't like was what I knew that they were going to do. They put in a bunch of filler quests, a bunch of dumb side quests that were unnecessary. They were not fun. They had nothing to do with the game, just to artificially make the game seem longer. They should have planned this out a little bit better. They shouldn't have ended the first game right after Midgar. They should have ended it maybe after the Nibelheim flashback, which is in Rebirth. Try to even out the lengths a little bit, because, the side quests and the menial tasks in Remake were so boring and not fun. They did not add anything to the game. They detracted from the game. And you can absolutely tell they were just put in there to artificially lengthen, the game, because it was shorter than they thought. So they were just like, go find a cat for 40 minutes. Even the graphics were a mixed bag. You had some just amazing sights in the game, and then you had some really bad, like, JPEG backgrounds with pixelated artifacts in the background. And absolutely, you can give them credit. You could say it was made for the PS4, which is last generation. First there is PS5 upgrade, the integrate upgrade, which is true, right? But I've definitely seen some PS4 games that have, better graphics. But anyways, obviously I played it through Remake. I beat it. I wished that save data would carry over to the next game, but I also understand why they said it wasn't going to. But again, I think that's a planning issue, just like the length of the game issue. It's definitely a planning issue that I wish they thought of more, because I think it would have been way more immersive if they could connect the save data in some fashion. Maybe not necessarily carrying over your exact levels and stuff like that, but something to connect the two. But even with those complaints, they did, do a good job at modernizing the world and the characters for a new audience. So if you aren't a purist like me, then you probably like the game much more than I did. And now we're up to Rebirth, and I'm definitely not a big enough channel to get a review code or anything like that. So, I bought the game at launch, and I was definitely hopeful for this one because I actually played the demo first, the Nibelheim demo. And I actually really enjoyed it. I really picked up on a lot of the improvements to the game just from the demo. So I actually started to get, a little hyped for it. It definitely felt like a more polished experience. So I've gone through the game, I've beaten the game, everything done, 100%. Having said all that, having said that, I don't feel like modern Squaresoft's the same as old Squaresoft, and I didn't like Remake that much. It succeeded in a lot of facets, but it definitely was worse in a lot of facets. Well, Rebirth actually might be my favorite role-playing game of all time.
He was in a different league from the rest of us.
Supplanting the original Final Fantasy VII. The big thing that I was worried about when the game was coming out, whether I was going to like it or not, it was the sort of, the litmus test for me is I don't like open world games. So it really bothered me that they were putting giant open world segments in the game. I don't like open world games. I've talked about this before in like random videos, I think, but I personally don't like open world games, and I'm okay with being in a minority here. I know most people nowadays like open world games. To me, they're kind of lazy nowadays, and they're very boring. That's the drawback of open world stuff. Is to me, it's very boring, and I'm a very narrative focused game player. I really like a good narrative, and so even in Rebirth, it feels weird to go through these heavy narrative cities and events that are happening, and then just getting thrown in a big open world area and being like, oh, okay, there's no story for the next 2 hours as you go around and get icons, collect different icons. And so I would honestly say the open world sections are actually my least favorite part of the game, which, if you know me, if you know the channel, you knew that's what I was going to say. But they're not too bad, especially once you get the chocobo in each section. Each section has a chocobo, or, you do get the car when you get to the desert. I'm going to try not to say spoilers here, but I'm also going to assume you have played the original Final Fantasy VII, so you do get the buggy. So the open world sections were definitely too overwhelming at first to me. Very overwhelming, but once you get the chocobo, and the fast travel in the game is really, really good. Obviously, you just need to get to an area, and then any point in the future, you could fast travel to that area. When you go to a different continent or something like that, you can't fast travel to the old continent until you get to the end of the game, which I won't 100% necessarily spoil that, even though, again, I'm assuming you've played the original Final Fantasy VII while we talk, because I'm going to compare some things. But the fast travel is great. The open world is not as big as I thought it was going to be, so it's actually pretty reasonable to go around and do your collecting the icons in 2 hours or so, which again, it's not a gameplay loop that I personally necessarily like, but it's there. Open worlds are here to stay. So the open world areas are pretty cool. Graphically, they're pretty darn amazing. They're honestly easy to travel through, and they're really easy to actually dodge the enemies. So if you do, unlike the original game, which is just random battles, if you do not want to battle anything as you're running around, it's pretty easy to avoid them, if that makes sense. And as you're running around and collecting different various icons all over the world map, I will give you one piece of advice. Go into the PlayStation menu and turn the volume on your controller off, because another character, not as bad as Roche, but another character is back. You know who I'm talking about. Mr. Chadley is back. And Mr. Chadley and his sister Mai, who fight and bicker and argue all the time through your controller, is pretty freaking annoyingly frustrating at times. The amount of times they talk to you and you just want them to be quiet. After every little thing, you don't need Chadley to chime in and tell you in a weird robot way about something.
Provide to develop new materia, quid pro quo. To summarize, I want us to become research partners.
The Chadley and Mai dialogue was super overkill. I honestly don't know what they were thinking with that. If you've played the game already, which you probably have, you know what I'm talking about. But I did like most of the other characters in the game, the updated characters. It's definitely new enough and definitely familiar enough. There's a real good balance in between. They hit it right on, I think, with Rebirth. So let's talk about the good first. Let's talk about the overwhelming, awesome stuff that Rebirth does. And just like the high point in Remake, the high point in Rebirth, again, is the modernization and the retelling of the original Final Fantasy VII universe, the Final Fantasy VII story, Final Fantasy VII lore, the characters. Everything is so new, but it still feels like that warm nostalgia blanket that's over me, that takes me back to my teenage years. Sitting on my bed, playing Final Fantasy VII, eating Doritos. They hit the magic sweet spot with Rebirth for sure. And this might not be a strength of Rebirth because, the characters and, again, the universe and the storyline are from Final Fantasy VII. And I truly believe Final Fantasy VII is one of the best storylines in any Final Fantasy ever. And the best character cast. I think that's, to me, at least in my mind, that's where a lot of modern Final Fantasies miss the boat, is the bad cast of characters. Case in point, Final Fantasy 6 and 7 are my two favorite of all time, and they have the best casts of characters of all time. My least favorite ones of all time, like Final Fantasy 15, for example, the four Dude Bros walking through this barren open world desert with nothing going on in that dumb car, is probably the worst cast of characters of all time. And it's definitely low on my list of Final Fantasies that I've enjoyed. You can really hit or miss on an RPG with the characters themselves, whether, they have interesting stories or, interesting designs, whether you root for them. Like literally, as I play through Rebirth, and I was always a Tifa person more than an Aerith person back in the day, but as I play through Rebirth and I sort of know what, the culmination point is going to be in Rebirth, maybe they, no spoilers, maybe they twist it or something like that. But, getting to the ultimate end of Rebirth as it starts to build up and build up and build up, you go through each character. Each character has a story arc in it, and you're building it up. And it's giving these special moments with Aerith and other certain characters as it builds up. And they did a masterful job of making you care about the characters, especially, I keep mentioning Aerith. Yes, especially Aerith, as it builds up to the culmination of the game. As I got closer and closer to the end of the game, the walls started to close in a little bit. Like I, knew what was coming. And they knew that I knew what was coming, because they built in all these amazing, scenes, cinemas, interactive, dialogues with the characters.
And there it was, the first step on our new journey. You coming? Yeah.
Of course, Rita. Right?
That really, really got you emotionally invested in what was going on. You could really see Cloud's character growth throughout the game too. A lot of the nuances in the story are actually hard to pick up in the original Final Fantasy VII, because obviously it's not as detailed as Rebirth. And the dialogue when it first came out was not like 100%. There were some, errors, there was some bad wording and stuff like that. And so even when I played it back in the day, I didn't fully understand what was going on in the storyline until the lore got fleshed out a little bit later, with Crisis Core and different things over the years. And then obviously Rebirth is here, and Rebirth sort of perfected the what's going on in the story, so you can clearly tell what's going on. But it was a little bit cryptic in the original Final Fantasy VII, not too bad, but to me that's obviously where Rebirth shines. The story, the setting, the characters, the interactivity between the characters. Like that to me in this game is an 11 out of 10. And I love these characters so much. I love the storyline so much. I love the setting so much that I'm telling you, I'm shocked that I think I do like this more than the original Final Fantasy VII. This might be my number one JRPG of all time. My number one. And I'm not a Squaresoft hater, but I'm a realist, and I do realize that modern Squaresoft is not the same as old Squaresoft. There's a lot of questionable decisions, questionable creative choices they make nowadays. And so I've touched on the graphics before. The graphics are obviously this was made from the ground up on the PS5, and they're pretty amazing. I played it on graphics mode, not performance mode. I chose to take the frame rate hit a little bit to have better looking cinemas, because obviously there's a ton of cinemas, a metric ton. But I know that some people, like my buddy Johnny Millennium, he likes to play on performance mode for the higher frame rate. So it's just, whoever you want to be. And the graphics are definitely great for the most part. I know some people complain about the textures. Texture work in the game is not that good. They're very low res when you actually look at them up close. To me, not a big deal whatsoever. I know there's PC purists making a big deal about it or whatever, but you only notice it like literally when Cloud talks to Chadley on his little communicator, and then that's it. Like whenever you're in the world in a cinema, you can't tell. Like it looks completely amazing, completely fine. The environments are super expansive. They're super detailed. They look super good. Obviously all the characters are, they can't look any better than they look. Like literally, this game could not look any better character-wise, I don't think. From Tifa to Barrett to Kate Sith to, you know, Red 13, Nanaki, everybody just looks so good. It's animated so good. A lot of care was taken into updating, you know, the characters, modernizing them a little bit and making them believable as real people. And another amazing job for sure. Obviously, there's all the magic effects and summons that, you know, Final Fantasy is known for. And, you know, those are obviously amazing. They're, you know, 10 out of 10. They never miss on those. They miss on some things, but they never miss on those. So I won't dwell on them too much. Yes, the summons look like past Final Fantasy summons. They're, you know, amazing. The spell effects are amazing. All that good stuff. So you could definitely tell it was definitely upgraded from Remake, and that was mostly because it was built from the ground up for the PS5. Probably be a PC version eventually, I would guess, but, you know, eventually. The music is another great thing.
Beggars can't be choosers.
Few new tracks here, but there's also a lot of, you know, the classic tracks, and I don't think, to me, in my mind at least, there's not a huge upgrade from the classic tracks to me, because, right, the PlayStation was one of the first CD-based systems. So the PlayStation generation, the Saturn and the PlayStation, you know, 3DO, there's some good examples of it on obviously the Sega CD too, but that's, you know, when CD technology got in there, that's when soundtracks really leveled up. That was a huge jump from the 16-bit era, which sounded pretty good. A lot of the Super Nintendo, you know, RPGs have classic, you know, GOAT soundtracks too. But when we had CD audio, starting back then, a lot of the music was full, you know, orchestrated music and all that good stuff. So what I'm saying is the jump from there to nowadays is actually not that much, because, you know, CD-based audio was pretty darn good. You could get, like, you know, real songs in a game rather than beeps and boops. A lot of, you know, the melodies and the songs sound very similar to the original game, and they were obviously amazing. It's definitely, again, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, I'm sure.
Ow! Yes, sir!
Sephiroth? But why would he?
And this just continues that trend. So let's talk about some of the okay stuff. The good, the okay, and the ugly we're going to talk about. So one of the things I thought was just maybe okay about the game is it does have a little bit of overload of mini games. And I do know some JRPG players, like Emily from Orbology, actually dislikes mini games. So I don't even know if this game is for her, because there's so many mini games. Even when you don't think you're going to get a mini game, you get a mini game. In mini games, I don't mind in RPGs whatsoever, but when you have the amount of mini games, sub games, whatever you want to call them, that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has in it, what you're always going to get. I'm a chef in real life, and if you go to a restaurant, let's use this analogy. If you go to a restaurant with a giant phone book of a menu, like 100 items on the menu, guess what? 50 of those menu items are going to be terrible. They're going to be terrible. They're just on the menu because they think they need to cater to everyone in the world. It's the same thing with mini games. With so many mini games, say there's 50 mini games in this game, well, you know, 15 of them are going to be completely unfun garbage heaps. It's just the way it goes. And Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is no different. Some of the mini games are extremely fun. They're fun enough that you want to replay them. And some of them are just so, like, obviously Queen's Blood. Queen's Blood, the card game in the game, is super fun. I beat all the quests, you know, I became Blood Dictator or whatever. And it's definitely a really fun game. There's definitely a lot of luck with it, but you know, you can, you know, you get to keep trying again, so it's okay. But there's a staggering amount of other mini games, staggering amount. There's box throwing games, there's, you know, frog mini games, there's chocobo stealth missions, there's chocobo throw things at the chocobo mission. That's not even counting the golden saucer mini games, which obviously the golden saucer was going to have games, and it definitely does have a bunch in there. Including the motorcycle game, yes, that's back. But just some of the mini games are completely frustratingly unfun. And if you want to do everything in the game like me, you just gotta stick it out and do it. But it does wear on you a little bit, especially with some of the games where, you know, you're just not very good at them. And you can't get your high score that you need. And it does detract from the game a little bit. Because, again, it's that starting, stopping, right? There's a lot of story in the game, but then you have to stop to the open world areas. well, you got to stop to do a mini game every, hour or two, a new different type of mini game. And some of the good mini game updates in the game, by the way, I wasn't sure how they were going to handle Fort Condor, but I actually really like the Fort Condor mini game. Yes, that does make a return here, and I definitely dig it. So just be aware there's a lot of mini games here, and some of them, they're very hit and miss, right? So some of them are great, some of them are bad. I guess maybe they average out to be not that bad. But, if you're not a mini game person, then you're gonna have a tough time with Rebirth. The next thing I maybe thought was only just okay in the game is probably the battle system. And I know some people are throwing in the towel. Like, we need an active battle system. They can't do, the old turn-based battle system anymore in this day and age. I understand that. I understand Square Enix, they want action combat in their games nowadays. They're never going to go back to turn-based. And it's okay. It's a sign of the times, just like the open world areas. But I do think the battles could have a little bit more finesse to them. They're definitely button mashy. They're button mashy. Choose a random attack once in a while. Button mashy, choose a random attack once in a while. It's that sort of feedback loop. There's not a lot of technique with it. For example, Final Fantasy 16, which I was playing through, I'm about halfway through that before I started Rebirth. But now that Rebirth's over, I'll pick it up again. But anyways, I wasn't a huge fan of that battle system either, but it definitely has more technique to it, more finesse. You can still do attacks, but it definitely flows a little bit better. And I just wish the battles flowed a little bit better. It wasn't so much stop and go, stop and go, stop and go. And the visual splendor of the battles is just like absolutely amazing, amazing. It's so chaotic at times, you can't, literally cannot tell what's going on. And that's where the technique falls off a little bit. It's kind of hard to dodge and block in the game because so much stuff is happening all the time, enemies from all different directions. And that's why I say it's a little boring to me, a little button mashy. But having said that, the battles are very visceral. And I really like how each character plays completely different. There's new synergy attacks in the game, which are pretty darn amazing, which is no surprise also, visually amazing. And they're not all attacks too. Some can give you positive status boosts like ATB gauges or unlimited MP for a time. And to actually get to the point where you use a synergy attack, you actually basically have to use regular abilities on the characters to build up like a point system. And some synergy attack takes, 3 points per person. All the characters involved in the synergy attack. But they're definitely cool. And they're definitely, more bombastic, super visceral, super visually entertaining attacks. And honestly, I got bored with the battle system eventually. I actually turned the difficulty down. I started on normal and was going through the game fine. No game overs or anything like that. But just the battle system became too tedious for me. So I just switched it to, storyline mode or the easiest mode. Just because that's what I'm here for. I'm here for the story. I'm not here for a Dark Souls-like experience or anything like that. And you can say what you will. You can say what you will with that. Am I not a real gamer? I don't care. It's how I chose to play. Just to sort of blow through the battles again because I wasn't enjoying them. So I wanted them to be shorter. So I did that. You enjoy it how you want to enjoy it. And now let's talk about the ugly. The things the game completely fails at. And there's nothing. That's it. There's nothing on the list. I'm telling you, from a Final Fantasy purist, Final Fantasy VII purist standpoint, Final Fantasy Rebirth, I'm telling you, it hits all the right notes. It doesn't do anything terrible. There was a couple things that I thought Remake did terrible, or ugly, as I like to call it. But they fixed all of those for Rebirth. I was honestly very surprised that they fixed them. That this was such a jump up from Remake. And I literally, when the game first came out, that's when I caught COVID. So I was stuck at home missing work and everything like that. And I literally could not put the game down. I loved the warm blanket feeling, revisiting these childhood, characters that I loved so much. One of my favorite casts of Final Fantasy characters of all time in a real world that actually was tied together so well. When you actually, get to the end of the game and unlock all the areas and stuff, like the world really fits together sort of beautifully. And the game does make some storyline changes that make you scratch your head a little bit, but the nostalgia points in the game, the big points in the game, you know, going to Junon and doing the parade is there, going through the swamp, even the dolphin's there, the dolphin from under Junon, the weapons make an early appearance here, the golden saucer and Dio, the heartfelt storyline moments with the characters. You're playing through a new modern game, but these nostalgia points, if you've played the original, really, really tug at you. And for me, at least, when they come up, you know, it brings me back to a simpler, much simpler time in my life, where, you know, life was a little bit more joyful. And that's the magic of video game. That's what the magic of Final Fantasy Rebirth is to me. Games can be magic. Games can do some crazy things because they're so interactive, even more than movies, more than, you know, music. To be back there, to enjoy the Final Fantasy VII world with Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, Barrett, Vincent, Cid is there, Yuffie, Kate Sith, Red 13, they're all there in this game. I literally could not ask for a better update to Final Fantasy VII in my mind than this game. I would maybe, you know, change the battle system a little bit if, you know, I was in charge. I don't think every game nowadays needs open world areas, come on. But even with two of my least favorite things of all time, the open world and, you know, the non-interactive slash, I guess, semi-interactive battle system, this could be my favorite role-playing game of all time. If you have any attachment to Final Fantasy VII, or if it's new to you too, let me know what you think about Rebirth down below. Let's have a conversation. Because I'd love to hear about someone's opinion about Rebirth who's actually never played the original, has no nostalgia based on the original. I think they might even like it more than me because you're probably used to open world areas and stuff like that. Whereas to me, that's a detraction a little bit. You know, for someone else, that could be like, hey, this is the best JRPG of all time. All right, so I've talked so much, my throat is hurting so much, but I really wanted to get this video out. I really wanted to express my emotions about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I hope I did it well. So guys, gals, non-binary pals, thanks for tuning in. Keep tuning in for more, please. I don't release as much content as I'd like nowadays, mainly because I was sick, but there is Sega Saturn videos coming up, Sega Saturn from A to Z, the best games from A to Z, PlayStation lists, and I literally have ideas for hundreds of videos at this point. So if you want to support me and stuff, all you got to do is click stuff below and comment. But thanks for being patient with me. Peace out.